I've played a lot of card games. I've always liked them. Something about collecting them, crafting your deck to match your preferred playstyle, and then battling it out with other players appeals to me. The element of chance, the strategy, the synergies, all of it. As a 90s kid, my very first collectible card game that I ever played was the Pokemon trading card game. This was back during the Pokemon boom at the time when everyone and their mother was obsessed with pocket monsters. I feel like the vast majority of us didn't actually understand the rules to the game and mostly just collected and traded the cards, but it was my first foray into card gaming. Not long after that, Yugioh broke onto the scene and started making waves. A more mature, edgy alternative that featured gross monstrosities and some pretty gnarly imagery. However, unlike the Pokemon card game, I feel that most of us knew the actual rules and how to play the game. This started my relationship with Yu-Gi-Oh! One where I would have prolonged periods where I didn't play at all, and would pick up Hearthstone and Magic to varying degrees, but I'd always end up returning in some capacity. As it stands now, I have been buying most of the video game adaptations for quite some time. I'm currently dipping my toes into Master Duel, having played a good amount of Duel Links and Legacy of the Duelist. The game has changed a great deal from when I was a kid, trying to convince my mom to buy a starter deck for me. The game as we know it is currently much faster paced and combo driven, with complex tactics that create very complicated game states. There have been the introduction of several new types of monster cards, novel mechanics, extra field zones, and 5 different ruling overhauls through the Master Rules. But throughout, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has remained a sort of anomaly among the major trading card games. I believe there are inherent design choices in this particular game that make it stand out from its peers. I don't believe these aspects are necessarily negative or positive, but I firmly believe that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is easily the most unique of the major trading card games. This makes the game maddening in some ways and incredibly engaging in others, but always noteworthy. To start with one of its first unique properties, the game is always beholden to its origins. I would consider the big 4 of collectible card games to be Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic, Pokemon, and in my opinion, Hearthstone. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is noteworthy in that it originates from a manga source. I'm assuming most people watching this video are familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh!'s history, so I won't waste much time on recounting it. The reason this distinction matters is that unlike the other card games, the central rules and mechanics of the game were not designed by a team of game developers, but rather by one manga artist. Kazuki Takahashi didn't intend to make a series focused on card games at all, but rather a villain-of-the-week supernatural thriller with horror elements. Once the Duel Monsters card game element was introduced into the story, it immediately became popular among readers, and his publishing executives encouraged him to focus on that aspect more. He created a set of rules that ultimately differed from what became the official rules, but he still established the core design systems of monsters, spells, traps, tributing, attack and defense points, the field, etc. Takahashi is not a game designer, but the game is forever centrally built around the choices he made when crafting his narrative. Magic, Hearthstone, and virtually all other card games were designed from their inception by teams of game designers, with significant playtesting and balancing before they were ever released. The Pokemon trading card game was created as a card translation of the original source material, the video games. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game was a sort of happy accident that just sort of happened as a consequence of a supernatural teen manga series. You can see that even after the manga pivoted to be focused exclusively on the Duel Monsters game, Takahashi was not certain how the game should actually function. Any fan of the anime will be very aware of the many rule modifications that took place between the Duelist Kingdom and Battle City arcs. The requirement of tributes for higher stat monsters, the legality of direct attacks, the amount of starting life points, Many of the core mechanics were being tweaked throughout the original manga run. This is not something that has a comparison for the other card games, who were established with much more concrete rules. There are several key mechanics that separate Yu-Gi-Oh! From its competitors, but I believe the greatest of these is the mechanic of cost. In games like Magic and Hearthstone, there's the concept of mana. Every card has a cost associated with it before it is able to be played. For Magic, this takes the form of land cards that are drawn and then played to provide you with mana of the corresponding color. In Hearthstone, the default method is that each player receives 1 mana crystal per turn, allowing the game to gradually ramp up. In Pokemon, the system of energy is in place, which serves as a required resource for Pokemon's moves. Yu-Gi-Oh! Stands alone as lacking a mana or energy system. The central resource in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the cards themselves. Through the tributing system, a monster with 5 or 6 stars requires you to destroy one of your own monsters to summon a stronger monster. This is limited by the rule in which you are only allowed 1 normal summon per turn. However, there is no such rule in place for the special summon. While special summoning was once somewhat rare in the early days of the game, it has become the standard summoning method over the years. With a cost mechanic such as mana, a player may open a hand filled with their most powerful cards, but will be unable to play them until they accrue enough of the required resource. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, especially the modern version of the game, it is not uncommon to see a first turn in which a player combos 10 plus cards and ends on a board state that's incredibly powerful. Even if your cards combo together well, if you lack the required mana to bring them out, it will put limiters on what you're able to accomplish and how quickly. Seeing as cards themselves are the only real resource in Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of life points, it also means that card advantage is more important in this game than others. If you are able to potentially play your whole hand in 1 turn, the amount of cards you possess becomes that much more important. As an example, 2 of the strongest cards ever printed are Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity. The first of these allows you to draw 2 cards, while the latter allows you to draw 3 cards and then discard 2. In other games, these effects would be considered good, but not unbelievably broken like they are in Yu-Gi-Oh! As an example, look at the Hearthstone Mage card, Arcane Intellect. This card allows you to play it to draw 2 cards. This text on the card is literally the exact same as Pot of Greed's. However, Hearthstone has the cost mechanic of mana, meaning you must pay 3 mana to fill this card. If you play this card the earliest you could through natural means, on turn 3, that means you are unable to play almost any other card that turn. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, you could slap down Pot of Greed on turn 1 and immediately start your chain of combos. As an inverse example, the card Delinquent Duo forces the opposing player to discard 2 cards from their hand. This means that you spent 1 card to remove 2 of your opponents, meaning your opponent went -1 at card advantage. Similarly, Pot of Greed has you spend 1 card to draw 2, letting you go +1 by playing it. The 3 cards I've mentioned previously have all been on the list of banned cards for over a decade now. The amount of cards you have in hand or graveyard in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just that important, that merely going +1 or -1 in card advantage can make a huge difference. Another notable difference lies in the lack of a mulligan system. For those unfamiliar, a mulligan refers to a system where the player is able to modify their opening hand, often at a disadvantage. For example, Hearthstone has a required mulligan stage for the opening hand, in which both players swap out cards for fresh draws at the start of the game. In Magic, the process is much the same, with the optional mulligan allowing a new hand, with 1 fewer card in hand for each mulligan they performed. Yu-Gi-Oh! Conspicuously completely lacks a mulligan system at all, meaning you are forced to play whatever opening hand you draw. This has ramifications on the process of deck building and design. If you are required to play whatever cards are in your opening hand, it means that consistency becomes that much more important. A dead hand that presents few worthwhile play options initially can be a huge disadvantage, especially given the current speed of the game. One of the core differences that sets apart a merely good deck from a competitive meta deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is its level of consistency. A deck may possess the ability to combo off with a perfect starting hand, but if it bricks otherwise, it will never truly crack into the top tiers of viability. A deck with multiple redundancies and several combo starters has a greater chance of building up steam quickly and winning the game. One surprise for many people who play other card games is Yu-Gi-Oh's format system. The other three of the big four make use of a standard type system that has a rotating set of cards that are legal to play. This always includes the most recent cards, as well as those that have come out not too long ago. This creates a system where the meta is consistently refreshed, at the cost of your cards only being legal in the format for a temporary time. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is truly exceptional in that it has never utilized a system like this. Cards that came out over 20 years ago are still entirely tournament legal to this day, and some do still see play even. When you play against an opponent in Yu-Gi-Oh!, they are playing from a pool of over 11,000 cards at any given time. When deck building, you have a truly massive collection to choose from, opening up an incredible potential for deck diversity. This also impacts the design space for Konami, as each card that is released must ideally be balanced on its interactions with these thousands of legal cards. This has led to the creation of the massive banned and limited list, full of cards that are entirely banned from tournament play or limited in the amount of copies allowed. Magic's multiple formats work as a balancing system, and Hearthstone's digital nature allows cards to be nerfed or buffed on the fly. With every single card since the game's inception being in the same format, Yu-Gi-Oh! Possesses a ban list much larger than Magic's. Yu-Gi-Oh! Continues to lag behind many other major trading card games in alternative formats. Magic has 10 supported formats in constructed play alone, while Yu-Gi-Oh! Has primarily relied solely on the advanced format. This does seem to be changing though, as the past few years have seen Konami experimenting with new formats such as Speed and Rush Duels. In addition, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has some very pronounced regional differences between countries. The two countries with the largest population of duelists, America and its native land of Japan, technically play two different versions of Yu-Gi-Oh! In the West, we primarily play with what is called the TCG, for the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. Meanwhile, Japan and some other regions play the OCG, Yu-Gi-Oh! The official card game. The differences are not just related to their names, however. The OCG receives new cards before the TCG, allowing different strategies to develop ahead of time in that scene. There are even still some 1,000 plus cards in the OCG that have not been released in the TCG ever, and a smaller amount vice versa. Also, the two regions have different ban lists as well, meaning that certain cards are forbidden in one format and not in another. This can result in drastically different top-level play and metas that look distinctly different. Most cards are released in Japan first, and many Western players look at the Japanese scene to get an idea of the future developments of the game. However, this is not 100% accurate, as the different ban lists mean this is not a one-to-one comparison. Most of these unique attributes of Yu-Gi-Oh! I've mentioned previously are large-scale, meta-level game design aspects. However, I think there are a variety of smaller mechanics that make the game unusual that are worth mentioning. For example, collateral damage seems to be a common mechanic in many card games. In Magic and Hearthstone, if you attack into an opposing unit, your own card suffers damage equal to that opponent's strength. This means that a bunch of small units can all rush into a larger one, eventually bringing it down by chipping away at its health. There is an aspect of trading in those games, trying to most efficiently deal with a threat while leaving your own defenses covered. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, that mechanic is more akin to a winner-takes-all system. If a monster with 100 attack points was to be challenged by a monster with 101 attack points, the latter monster would defeat the former, without a single point of damage. The game has a completely binary black and white system of battle, where the victorious monster emerges entirely free of harm. Even as destruction by battle has become less prevalent in the modern game, attack points are still very important. Aside from link monsters, all monsters have defense points as well. While often less important than attack, Yugioh also has a noteworthy system of positions for monster cards. Magic has a system of blocking with units to avoid direct damage, but Duel Monsters requires that the monster be placed in a defensive position for its defense points to be used. This can lead to some interesting strategies for certain deck archetypes, as well as forcing your opponent's units into a more vulnerable position. This also ties into the uncertainty aspect that Yugioh leans into more heavily. Monsters, spells, and trap cards can all be placed into a face-down position, in which the opponent has no publicly available information regarding them. This requires having some idea of the sort of cards the opposing player would be running, and attempting to figure out the optimal play based on that. Magic does allow for face-down cards in some circumstances, and certain classes in Hearthstone have access to secrets that function in a similar way, but they don't have this as a mechanic central to the game like in Yugioh. There is also the aspect of tournament, manga, and video game exclusive cards being playable. In general, these cards do not often see much competitive play, but there are always fringe cases, as in the examples of Crush Card Virus and Mechanical Chaser. The latter card was originally only available in the first tournament pack, with an attack value that was exceptionally high for the time period in which it was printed. This led to the card going for incredibly exorbitant prices, often preventing people from playing at a top level due to finances alone. In Yu-Gi-Oh's battle system, his extra 50 attack points meant a great deal in a competitive environment. And there you have it. Those are, in my opinion, a handful of the most significant reasons for why Yu-Gi-Oh plays so differently than its competitors. Are there any other specific traits that you think contribute to the unique playstyle of Yu-Gi-Oh? If you feel that there are any other mechanics I didn't discuss, please let me know down in the comments.